coming into Israeli territory.
To show you what they don't want you to see.
It's still a disaster. What's the latest?
They call these street releases. You've got hundreds of people being dropped off. It's getting worse.
We're the nation's fastest growing news program for a reason.
Real journalism.
They're all marching down to the White House.
Sounds to me, Ben, like they won't be happy until Israel doesn't exist.
Real American news.
America is under chemical warfare attack. Fentanyl is the weapon.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
I appreciate you guys very, very much.
This is America's Voice Live with Steve Gruber.
It is so good to have you along for the ride on today's edition of America's Voice Live. I'm Terrence Bates, in for Steve Gruber. It is Wednesday, February 12th. Let's get right to today's top stories. The first Doge subcommittee meeting kicked off just a couple of hours ago. It has since wrapped up, but I can tell you there were some fiery comments from both sides of the aisle. Coming up, the chairwoman of that committee will be joining us to talk about this first installment of that meeting. Also, we'll get into 10 bipartisan bills that are aimed at easing the burden on taxpayers and addressing crucial issues affecting the nation's taxpayers and your tax dollars. And later, ICE was blocked from engaging potential recruits at an NYU campus, and the petition that stopped it all claimed that ICE has a history of racial profiling. We'll explain those stories and so much more right now on America's Voice Live. The House Subcommittee on the Department of Government Efficiency is off to a flying start after holding its first hearing on Capitol Hill today. The committee is chaired by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
We were each elected to serve and represent the American people and how their hard-earned tax dollars are spent. We as Republicans and Democrats can still hold tightly to our beliefs, but we are going to have to let go of funding them in order to save our sinking ship.
Today's hearing focused on Medicaid spending and what the Georgia Republican describes as, quote, rushing pandemic-era funding out the door without proper oversight mechanisms. The committee is expected to work hand-in-hand with President Trump and his team to root out waste, to fix broken payment systems, and to investigate fraud schemes. Democrats are pointing out concerns about Elon Musk's influence in the federal government and potential conflicts of interest. Joining me now to discuss all of this and so much more is former Assistant Secretary of State under former President George W. Bush, Robert Charles. Robert, good to see you, my friend. He, of course, is also the author of a very cool book that you see there on your screen, Cherish America. Go pick that up wherever you buy your books. Robert, good to see you.
Always a blast to be with you, Terrence.
All right, so look, you've got some background in what Doge is doing because you've run oversight over various federal agencies. So talk about how this process is ultimately going to work. And from someone who's got inside knowledge, what are your expectations?
You know, I guess I couldn't be happier that we have serious-minded people finally, Terrence, going after a lot of this waste. I spent 5 years for Gingrich running the biggest part of the Oversight Committee, which included state, USAID, but also defense, justice, NASA. And then, ironically, I ended up being unanimously confirmed and put in the position of being Assistant Secretary of State, where I ended up deobligating hundreds of millions of dollars, calling contractors on the carpet. Just a couple very quick observations. First, this committee on the Hill is doing, and Doge is doing, God's work. We don't give away money to the federal government so that they can waste it by the trillions. We give it to them because there are functions that the federal government should provide. But when they waste it and they abuse it and they use it on their pet projects, that is an ultimate betrayal of the taxpayer. And by the way, if they do it at the state level, that's a betrayer of the taxpayer too. So a couple of very quick observations. This is just the beginning of the beginning of the beginning, Terrence, because there are 2,000 federal agencies, commissions, departments, and they are just beginning to scratch the surface. Number two, one of the most insidious pieces of this that I discovered, which they haven't even begun to talk about yet, is the mid-level employees that are permanently there who develop very personal, cozy relationships with these big primes. USAID has about 10 primes that have been around for 25 years. They have very close relationships with all the mid-level people. And by the way, so do all these other agencies. They have mid-level people who are tightly tied to the chief prime contractors. What do? They essentially create a friendship of sorts with these folks, and they don't do serious oversight. These are the people in the federal government. They don't do serious oversight of the contractors that they are working with. And very often, Terrence, if you go and look at who are the leading people in those primes, they're all people who worked for the agency with which that prime is now contracting. So there's a very incestuous sort of thing that goes on here across the federal government. And the more rocks they flip over, the more they're going to find. And I'll just tell you, it makes my heart warm. I look at the way in which these people are saying, I have a mission to find all these wasted dollars. And I'm going to tell you, the percentages are going to be huge. I don't know whether it's going to be 10%, 20%, 30%, but you're going to find that an awful lot of the federal tax money collected goes to things that are either ridiculous, unaligned with U.S. interests, completely wasteful, abusive, personal. They just don't, they're expenditures that shouldn't be happening.
Robert, my gut wants to call it fraud. I'm going to hold off on that, but I will call it waste. I think that's probably a fair way to describe it. And beyond that, it seems to me that this has been happening at epidemic levels. This isn't something a Johnny-come-lately issue. It's not something that just started happening. It's been happening for administrations and decades.
It has. It has. The federal government today is hundreds of times bigger than during the period when FDR was president, and it's thousands of times bigger than when people like Theodore Roosevelt were president. So it has a power. Concentrated power grows itself. This is what our founders told us again and again. Watch out for concentrated power, because whether it's at the federal level or at the state level, particularly if you get one-party government periodically, they essentially feather their own beds. There is no oversight. No one sends another Democrat to prison because they have wasted more federal dollars that were collected. And frankly, a lot of these monies, and I hate to say it, go to organizations that then turn around and give money back to the Democrat Party, whether it's Planned Parenthood or the teachers unions or any of these other organizations. And the primes do the same thing. And by the way, do look at the mid-level people at the State Department. Most of them, 95%, give money to Democrats, not Republicans. So it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone. And I will say, Terrence, that the word fraud is properly used on occasion. When a law requires free and open competition and a mid-level person doing contracting, very often a program manager, says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this to my good old friend, the prime here at USAID or anywhere else, and I'm going to call in two sort of mock competitors, and I'm going to find that, gosh, they don't really meet the needs that I have right now, and I'm going to give it back to my old friend, then that's fraud, okay? And I literally, I'll tell you something, when I ran a $2 billion operation, and those dollars probably today would be a $4 billion operation. And when I found contractors that were doing non-specific invoices, when I found that they had worked these cozy relationships with mid-level contract, people who are doing the procurement or doing the program management, I called the presidents of those companies in, and I won't name them here, but I called them in and I said, look, this looks to me like a $100,000 bill that you levied against my department, and I don't see any specifics. It looks like fuel at a cost in Iraq, let's say, that is multiples. You're asking reimbursement for multiples of the market value of that fuel. I want you to write a check right now for $100,000 by tomorrow back to the American taxpayer. And when they resisted, I told them, look, this is either going to go straight to an IG or to the Washington Post or as a criminal referral to the Justice Department. So I expect you right now to return that money to the American taxpayer. The good news was they did it because they knew they were called out. They knew they were wrong. And the other good news about it is, even though it got very little press, people like Colin Powell and Rich Armitage were about getting rid of that waste. Now, so was Ronald Reagan. But the big difference we've got right now is we've got people who are in there making this their number one priority, that they will go in there and they will save the American taxpayer the dollars that are otherwise being wasted and fraudulently spent. So, Terrence, fraud is not the wrong word. It's a very fitting word.
I try to choose my words carefully and to be fair, but I appreciate you saying that. And my gut, again, wanted to call it fraud, so I'm glad you did. And I'll just refer to you. Well, I won't refer to you, but I'll definitely move forward with that. Before I let you go, I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the confirmation processes that are still going on. Just this morning, Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed as D&I head. I'd like to talk about moving the government forward without having all cabinet members in place. How limiting is this?
Well, it is limiting because when you don't have a cabinet member, then you have an acting cabinet member. The acting cabinet member typically comes out of the bureaucracy, so it's not an individual that's going to be aligned with the president's view 9 times in 10. So you do need to get these confirmations to happen. That's why Schumer and the Democrats have slowed them down. Historically, Terrence, it is appropriate, it is accepted, it is the right course of action that a president gets the appointees that he seeks. Unless there is something fundamentally wrong with that candidate, and I mean fundamentally, integrity level, criminal act in the past undiscovered, etc., the president's prerogative holds. And that should be true, by the way, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. That's the way the Constitution was formed. The Senate has advice and consent that they provide. They're not here to give you 3 other options on that candidate. So sometimes they move quickly. My confirmation, which was unanimous, actually happened in 3 days. That's very unusual. But in this case, I don't think it's wrong that they're doing examinations of these candidates. But I also do believe that we need to get on with it because the president was elected by the United States, by the people of the United States. Almost every single demographic in the country jumped up from 2020 in support of him. People don't want fraud. They don't want abuse. They don't want to be misled, and they don't want their dollars wasted. And frankly, they also want them allied with the mission of that bureau or of that department. And I think the only way you get that is to get your cabinet member up there, confirmed, and calling the shots.
So what, in your mind, is a reasonable amount of time to have the entire cabinet confirmed? I realize it's only 3 weeks in now, not even a full month, but what's a reasonable amount of time so that we can really move forward with the business of the country?
Within the next couple of weeks, all cabinet members should be there, period.
Okay, and we'll leave it there. Robert Charles, we appreciate your time. Always good to talk to you, my friend.
Always a blessing to be able to be on your show. Thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon. Well, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, fireworks today during the first Doge subcommittee hearing. I'll show you some of the highlights next. with us. The House Subcommittee on the Department of Government Efficiency is off to a flying start after holding its first hearing on Capitol Hill today. The committee is chaired by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
We were each elected to serve and represent the American people and how their hard-earned tax dollars are spent. We as Republicans and Democrats can still hold tightly to our beliefs, but we are going to have to let go of funding them in order to save our sinking ship.
Today's hearing focused on Medicaid spending. Moving forward, the committee is expected to work hand in hand with President Trump to root out waste, to fix broken payment systems, and to investigate fraud schemes. Joining me now to further discuss what's next for Doge and its oversight committee, our committee chairwoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, as well as our chief White House correspondent, Brian Glenn. Congresswoman, good to see you. Brian, good to see you as well, but I'm sorry, you're going to have to defer to the Congresswoman. Based on this morning's hearing, do you expect that this committee is actually going to operate in a bipartisan fashion in order to truly ensure that American taxpayer dollars are being spent in proper fashion? You set that up in your opening remarks. I'm not so sure I get the sense that that will happen, but I'd love to get your perspective sitting on the committee.
You know, I always give people the benefit of the doubt, Terrence, and I had hoped that Democrats would come in and be serious on this committee. But we saw today that they weren't serious. Several of these members basically used their 5 minutes to try to score political points, attack me, attack Elon Musk, and attack President Trump. It was really outrageous, and you want to know something? I think their constituents are watching very closely at how serious they take our national debt, which is $36 trillion, and I don't think it'll play well for them in the midterms if they continue to go down this route.
Brian, what is the view from the White House? I realize you just left a White House press briefing. You asked about Doge and today's hearing. What's the response? What's the reaction?
Well, the reaction that I received here in this room, as far as listening to some of the pushback that many of the press had and the Democrats, as I sat in that room for 2 hours with Congresswoman Greene on that hearing, was they simply don't want to hear it. They don't want to see the receipts that are proving the fraud, the abuse, the corruption that's in our government. And of course, you know, we had experts there testifying about the trillions of dollars of fraudulent payments. They don't want to hear it. So, you know, I just think it's very interesting how many in the media push back on simply trying to find out how much fraud we have in our government. This isn't a political party issue. This is an American issue. This is a consumer issue. And to Congresswoman Greene's comments, I think many in their districts are going to see these sound bites, these political theater, this kabuki theater of just not taking this seriously. They're going to see those, and they're going to maybe change their mind the next time they go to the ballot box, because right now Democrats are not taking responsibility for some of this corruption as Republicans seem to be.
Congresswoman, let's get to some nuts and bolts. Explain how you see Doge ultimately functioning and Elon Musk's influence in the decision-making as it relates to any fraud, waste, or abuse that's found.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Terrence. So we finished our first hearing today, which is about improper payments. We're talking about $2.7 trillion that has been improperly paid out to dead people, criminals, people that should not be getting these checks, and it has cost the taxpayers tremendously. So in the next coming days, my committee, we will be issuing a report with our solutions, whether it's legislation, whether it's cuts, whether it's working with chairs of committees of jurisdiction to actually bring these solutions into action. These are important actions that can take place, for example, on the reconciliation budget. I was very happy to learn today from some of our witnesses that through the use of technology, we can actually save the taxpayers maybe $500 billion or more by stopping these improper payments. So these aren't just hearings that I'm going to be having on the Doge Committee here in Congress. We're going to be presenting solutions that we will put into action, and I'll also be bringing those to the Trump administration, bringing those to Elon Musk at Doge, and looking at the important work that we can get done for immediate results, not just 5-minute committee hearing clips that go on your social media.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, I wanted to ask you this question following up on that statement. As many of us sat in that room and watched it from at home, really infuriated by the kind of the disrespect that the Democrats show this committee and the American people, what was going through your mind? At that particular time, you saw Rep. Garcia break out a visual support to his 5 minutes, which I think turned into a clown show, and it really discredited his ability to have an intellectual conversation. But take me through what you were thinking when all this unfolded as we watched this hearing underway.
You know, I was actually pretty calm listening to them. You have to remember this has been baptism by fire for me in the past 4 years under the Biden administration. I've seen everything you can possibly see or go through here, serving under Nancy Pelosi as the first House Speaker when I was in my first term, and then also going through all the things that Democrats have done, things that they've said in committees, things that they've said on the House floor, and appalling legislation that they forced us to vote on. But you know what? I found it unfortunate, Brian. I actually did. I had hoped that they would, see the moment and understand the reason why they lost so big in November and try to pivot, perhaps. And I thought to myself, and I said it in my opening statement, if members of Congress from the far-reaching corners of each of the political parties can come together for solutions for the American people on our very serious shared problem of $36 trillion in debt, then America, we can come together on anything. But you know what? Democrats decided to choose partisan politics, play political theater, and try to produce attack ads, basically, is what some of that was. So if they want to continue down this road, then their constituents and their voters will know exactly what they're all about.
Congresswoman, as a casual observer, it seems to me that some of the fraud and waste that's been uncovered by Doge is part of a systemic problem. That it's, yes, people taking advantage of the system, but the system allowing it. So Doge is out here to uncover it, but it seems to me that the remedy has got to be to change the entire system. Otherwise, it continues. Give us some perspective on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Terrence, you're absolutely right. And none of this would have ever been possible without Elon Musk and his Doge team and President Trump signing that executive order, assigning this important assignment to Elon Musk as a special government employee and putting his team into action in every single department of the government. We wouldn't be able to look in and find out all the things we found out. I'll give you some examples. Some of my Republican colleagues that I work with voted to fund USAID when people like me wanted to defund it, and that happened last Congress. Well, now that all this information has come out on USAID, these were things that I didn't know. These were things that my Republican colleagues didn't know, even though we disagreed on funding and defunding. However, many of my Republican colleagues are so shocked at the information and how our hard-earned money has been spent. They're saying they regret those votes. They're saying they don't want to fund USAID anymore the way that it is. And so these are changes that have happened so fast, and that's come through the transparency that Elon Musk at Doge is providing. However, we can't just rely on executive orders and the executive branch alone. The legislative branch, members of Congress like myself, the House, the Senate, we have to come alongside the Doge effort, and we have to put this into legislation, which puts it into law. That makes it permanent. And this is how we really solve the crisis of impending doom of $36 trillion in debt and its dangerous compounding interest, not only for ourselves, for our children and generations to come.
Brian, just a quick follow-up. So, Congresswoman, do you anticipate actual legislation to solidify this, to entrench it in law, or is it going to be a lot of hearings, a lot of talk, a lot of rhinos rhetoric, but no real action?
Yeah, that's been one of my frustration is no action. And that's why I ran for Congress in the first place, Terrence, is because I'm a person of action. I'm a small business owner. We can't survive unless we are doing a good job for our customers, making a profit and taking good care of our employees. And so I'm taking that exact same approach here with my subcommittee on Doge on oversight. We have to create real action that produces results that last for the American people, because the American people people are our customer, and they deserve excellent service.
Brian,
so I look forward to that report coming out in a few days.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Brian, you've got the last word, sir. We're running out of time.
That's okay. 30 seconds. What can we see next in this subcommittee? What other topics can we see? We got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, great question, Brian. Coming up next, last week of February, it will be USAID. So we can expect major temper tantrums there by the Democrats that are continuing to protect their democracy and the nasty things that USAID has funded. Going into March, you will have NPR and PBS, and they finally confirmed today a date for our hearing. That came after I had to threaten a subpoena. So I'm glad that we're going to get that one on the books, and we'll roll out the information soon.
I'm ordering my popcorn right now. Send. Okay, it's going to be a good one.
And get a bigger room, too.
I know,
It was
right?
packed. Get a bigger room for that hearing.
Congresswoman Brian, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us, to both of you.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you. I had 10 bipartisan bills aiming to give relief to taxpayers. That story is next here on America's Voice Live. Taxpayers Union is out with its 14th annual no-brainers list. It highlights 10 bipartisan bills aimed at easing the burden on taxpayers. The bills, which span various areas of fiscal reform, include efforts to improve IRS customer service, reduce improper payments, and enhance financial transparency. These measures, by the way, are designed to ensure better management of taxpayer funds while promoting a more efficient government. Joining me now to discuss this and so much more is the president of the National Taxpayers Union, Pete Sepp. Pete, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start here. What is the prospect for getting these 10 bills that we just mentioned over the finish line in your mind?
Not bad, because we're having an increased focus on taxpayer interests rather than special interests here in Washington, D.C. And these no-brainer lists that we've been putting together for nearly 15 years now serve as grist for members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, to say, hey, they've got us here. These bills really are bipartisan. They are simple to understand. They should have been passed ages ago. And NTU, National Taxpayers Union, is telling us you got to start here. I think they have a very, very good chance of passing several of these, especially since today's topic of the so-called Doge committee. You had guests on just in the last segment about this. We're talking about improper payments. And 2 of these 10 bills have to do with just that. And again, bipartisan. If Washington, D.C. is serious about this and the Democrats are serious about doing something about improper payments, here's the place to start.
Pete, we're going to talk about Doge in a minute, but as I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, one of the major issues, one of the challenges for the IRS is people's confidence in the agency itself. It seems to me that fundamentally, you can deal with legislative stuff all you want, but if people don't have much confidence in the agency, where do you really start? How much are you really moving the issue forward?
That's right. I had the honor of being a witness yesterday at the House Ways and Means Committee on IRS modernization. I was one of 5 people there, and it was an excellent hearing because we were focusing on the IRS's promises of return on investment. Remember, they got $80 billion worth of additional funding in the Inflation Reduction Act versus what they've actually done. We've given the IRS a grade of D on its modernization efforts for a number of reasons. Yes, they've improved the clarity of forms and the content of forms, but they've fallen down on the job when it comes to replacing 60-year-old computer systems. I mean, from the Kennedy era, even the Eisenhower era, older than 60. This is the individual master file that has everybody's records in it. And the IRS has been struggling to try and do this for years. They've still failed despite getting an infusion of funding. That has to change. That's one reason public confidence in the IRS is so low.
All right, Pete, as promised, I do want to talk a bit about Doge. And one of the centerpieces of some of these bills that you mentioned is enhanced financial transparency, which is at the heart of what Doge is all about.
Yeah, exactly. One of the bills, this was introduced in the last Congress. It can get reintroduced very easily by Congressman Yakim of Indiana and Congressman Panetta, a Democrat from California. It's called the Improper Payment Transparency Act, requires the president's budget request to include detailed information on improper payments. What that does is establish benchmarks on which programs have problems with these payments when budgets are being proposed for them. Not after the fact when investigators find out, gosh, they've been misspending the money, but rather during budget season. That's vital because it will give members of Congress perspective on whether to increase or decrease the budgets of some of these agencies.
Pete, you're a practical guy. What your agency does is practical, but I'm going to ask you to put on your philosophical hat, if you will. Does it benefit agencies, even the IRS, to be transparent about funding, particularly since their funding is often based on the previous fiscal year's expenditures? It's a systemic issue, but let's just be honest. There are a lot of these agencies who are going to spend the money whether they need it or not, just because they want to keep the funding for the next fiscal year.
Yeah, they do have to be transparent because of that public skepticism we just spoke about. It's a new era in Washington. I mean, I've seen this before where you have the highlight on wasteful federal spending, saw that in the 1980s, a brief period in the reinventing government phase with Al Gore and Bill Clinton, then the Republican takeover of Congress. But this is a vital moment, a pivotal moment with Doge inside Congress with the caucus there, Doge outside Congress with Elon Musk, a renewed focus on this. And federal agencies would do themselves a great favor by saying, you know, we do need a course correction here, and we want to work with reformers rather than against them. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves up against some serious budget cuts.
We appreciate your time, Pete. Good to talk to you. Love this conversation. I suspect over the next 4 years, you and I will be having this conversation quite a bit more because there's a lot of work to be done.
It'll be a pleasure.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here. Coming up after the break, ICE was shut out of trying to get new recruits on NYU's campus. We'll take a deeper look, at this developing story. It's next. Everyone. Officials from U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement canceled student recruitment interviews for an online New York University School of Law career fair due to campus backlash. A petition protesting ICE was signed by at least 1,000 students and organizations at NYU and other local law schools. The petition said, and I'm quoting here, ICE is engaged in the exact kinds of behavior that harms many students regardless of immigration status. The petition went on to argue that ICE has a history of racial profiling, retaliating against immigrant rights activists, ignoring the law, fabricating evidence, relying on false evidence, confiscating and destroying documents and belongings of detainees, and purposeless detentions. Whew, that's a lot to take in. Joining me now to discuss this and so much more is campus reform correspondent and student at Old Dominion University in Virginia, Grace McKinnon. Grace, what do you make of all of this? What's going on campuses across the country, specifically here at NYU?
Yes, so here at the Leadership Institute's campus reform, we are reporting that ICE was scheduled to have student interviews for recruiting at NYU Law Career Fair just last week. Now, they were forced to cancel these interviews due to a student protest on campus with over 1,000 signatures. And this is all amid President Trump's immigration crackdown on across the nation. And these universities, presidents, and student protesters are just continuing to put illegal criminal immigrants, above the safety and interest of the law-abiding students.
Is this an indictment on law enforcement? It seems to me that there's this pushback on college campuses against law enforcement in general.
Yes, that is what I first thought of when I saw this story. Now, first we're starting with ICE. Next, it's going to be military recruiters, police on campus, security on campus. Where is the priority for safety for our students?
What is it going to take to turn this trend around, in your opinion?
I think we're already starting to see a trend turning it around with President Trump coming back into office. It's just been a few weeks, and he has already declared a national border crisis. By signing the Laken Riley Act, he is allowing ICE to do its job by arresting these criminal immigrants. And we've already seen the border crossings plummet by 90%, and his approval ratings are through the roof.
Grace McKinnon will have to leave the conversation there. Appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Always a pleasure. Well, folks, the IRS is the largest collection agency in the world, and it just stepped up its enforcement for 2025. If you happen to owe back taxes or if you've got unfiled returns, don't wait for the IRS to come after you. Simply avoiding your tax troubles is probably the worst thing you can do. Getting ahead of it is the smart move, but never, ever, ever contact the IRS alone. Instead, turn over your concerns to the team at Tax Network USA, because not all tax resolution companies are the same. Tax Network USA has a preferred direct line to the IRS, which means they know which agents to deal with and which ones to avoid like the plague. Tax Network USA has proven strategies that are designed to settle your tax problems in your favor, whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million. Their attorneys and their negotiators have resolved over $1 billion in tax debt. So talk with one of their strategists, because it's free. Stop the threatening letters, stop looking over your shoulder, and put the IRS troubles behind you once and for all. Call 800-905-8000 or visit tnusa.com/RAV. That's tnusa.com/RAV. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking gold and how it's your best hedge against a weakened dollar. My favorite guest from across the pond, Philip Patrick from the Birch Gold Group, he's going to drop by next. San Francisco. I think we're getting close to afternoon there. We appreciate those of you watching from San Francisco. We appreciate you joining us. President Trump is moving forward with a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum in hopes of giving struggling U.S. industries a bit of a shot in the arm. On Tuesday, the president of the European Commission expressed her strong disapproval of the U.S. president's decision, which of course was revealed on Monday night. She emphasized, quote, the imposition of unwarranted tariffs on the EU will not go without a response. The big question, could this move by President Trump lead to a trade war? Here with me to discuss that and so much more is precious metal specialist at the Birch Gold Group, Philip Patrick. Philip, good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Terrence.
All right, so put this idea of tariffs on steel and aluminum into economic logic for us.
Look, I think there's a couple of different things that President Trump is looking at here. Number one is to protect domestic industries, right? We have the steel industry, Pittsburgh, of course, well known for that. We need to protect our domestic steel industry and create jobs here in the United States. The other side of it, though, I think was with national security in mind, right? Our domestic steel and aluminum refining isn't enough to supply American industries, and that's a problem, right? Defense, aerospace industries are highly dependent on both steel and aluminum, and we're currently importing 25% of our steel and 80% of our aluminum. That could be a big problem. It reminds me of supply chain issues back at the beginning of the Ukraine war. We couldn't make any more Javelin anti-tank missiles, essentially because we didn't have the chips to do so. So I see this as another move to make American manufacturing less reliant on global supply chains and essentially foreign nations.
Just 3 weeks into President Trump's administration, are we in an economic revolution? And I asked that question given Doge and kind of looking into government efficiency. Now there are tariffs, which he is using not only as an economic tool, but also a bargaining chip. So much has changed so quickly.
Listen, an economic revolution is probably the best way to phrase it. And the reality is it was our only option. 4 more years of Kamala Harris or Biden-esque policy would have thrown us off the cliff. This administration clearly understand the problems. They're looking at deficits, they're looking at debt, they're looking at revenues, they're looking at bricks. So their priorities are straight, but it is going to take a complete overhaul of the economy to get us out of this mess. That is what they are attempting to do here. It is very encouraging. They just need the time to do it. That's going to be the big question.
Well, President Trump is dealing with everything from big dollars to the penny. One of his latest ideas is to stop minting the penny. He says it costs more to mint the thing than the thing is actually worth. It's an interesting idea, probably not a novel idea, but pretty ingenious. Makes sense.
Pretty ingenious. And listen, it's a sign, and that's what to say. Common sense is back in the White House. It's a good sign. Listen, like you implied, it's a drop in the bucket, but what sense does it make that we're making pennies that cost 4 pennies to make? It's literally nonsensical. And not only are we wasting money on it, we're borrowing money to waste money on it, which makes it even more absurd. We spent in 2023 alone $180 million making pennies, and it gets worse. A single nickel costs about 14 cents to make right now, and we make billions of those a year. So this sort of microscope, if you will, on public finances, I think is very important at a very important time. This is a drop in the bucket, but it's a sign of more common sense policies coming down the pipe.
And all of that brings us to gold, which you and I have often talked about is a hedge against the dollar, against the failing value of the dollar. And if the penny isn't even worth it to make, I think that might be a sign, right?
I think it's more than a sign. And since we've been talking about it, gold has been going up and up and up. Even since Trump took office, we've set all-time highs, I think, on 3 occasions since Trump took office. And it's a sign of the struggles in front of us. Even the administration are warning us. Listen, you don't deal with a $2 trillion deficit, a $36 trillion debt problem without going through hardship first. That's where precious metals come in. We expect them to set new highs consistently throughout the year as we try and iron these problems out. The administration know it's going to be a bumpy ride. They're telling us it's going to be a bumpy ride, and I think precious metals are the way to ease those bumps.
And that's where you and your colleagues at the Birch Gold Group come in. And the reality is, precious metals is simply an investment vehicle. Doesn't mean you have to put all of your money into it.
No, absolutely. I think the key here is to hedge our exposure. President Trump and the team, I am crossing my fingers. I am praying that they pull it off. If they do, it will be the single greatest economic feat in human history. No nation has come back from a debt position, a deficit problem like we have today. I have faith in President Trump and his team, but I'm hedging my bets just as they are and just as everyone else should be.
Well, if you just want to slide me a little bit of gold on the side, I will take it happily, my friend. Always good to see you. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Terrence. I appreciate being on.
Always a pleasure. And folks, if you're interested in the Birch Gold Group, simply text the word America to the number 989898 today, or that's 989898. Do so today. Get your free information kit on gold. Don't wait. Text them today and secure your savings. All right, folks, after the break, we're going to have a story that reminds us of just how wonderful America is. Plus, we'll have your answers to America's Voice question of the day. Here it is. Should there be any current federal spending, Social Security, defense, border security, etc., that is safe from Doge cuts? Looking forward to your answers. We are back with What Makes America Wonderful. And today, we're shouting out parents, in this particular case, moms, who go above and beyond for their kids. 95-year-old Malphine Fogel is the face of today's segment. Back in 2022, her son Mark was imprisoned in Russia and sentenced to 14 years for drug trafficking. He was arrested for possessing medical marijuana, which had been legally prescribed to him here in the United States. Since then, though, Malphine has been tirelessly seeking ways to bring her son back home to Western Pennsylvania. She even went on a media campaign. She reached out to Pennsylvania lawmakers, even spoke to then presidential candidate Donald Trump prior to his rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. For years, her son, Mark, went without the wrongfully detained designation, which could have helped pave the way for his release years ago. Last year, though, Malfine filed a lawsuit against Secretary of State Antony Blinken, but even that didn't help bring her son home. Then, a month after that lawsuit, the now 95-year-old was invited to speak with Donald Trump on the very same day that he was shot during a campaign rally. That conversation led to a mother's prayers ultimately being answered and Mark Fogel returning home to the United States. After his release and meeting with President Trump at the White House last night, Fogel said, "I want you to know that I'm not a hero in this at all. President Trump is a hero. These men that came from the diplomatic service are heroes." But to many Americans and sons and daughters across this country, the real hero here is Malfine Fogel, a mom who never gave up on her son. And that is why moms and dads are what truly make America wonderful. All right, folks, let's get to the America's Voice question of the day. Here it is on your screen. Should there be any current federal spending, Social Security, defense, border security, etc., that is safe from Doge cuts? Ooh, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this one. Lisa Johnson, shout out to you. We appreciate you chiming in here. You're right. The fraud has to stop. That means going through everything, capital everything here, as you can see. Start with the clean slate and go forward. Kim Spielman Herward writes, there are thousands upon thousands of people who are receiving Social Security benefits and Medicare that are abusing the system. But for me, I need it to survive. Don't shut the door on me and those who need it. Thank you so much, Kim. We appreciate your thoughts. And Carol Frank, thank you for chiming in, writing, only money being spent fraudulently should be targeted. If it's getting to its rightful place, leave it alone. Isn't that the purpose of Doge? Interesting thought there. Up next is Bonnie Buttle. She writes, find out if the money is actually getting to those individuals that have earned it and make sure the money is getting into the wrong, and make sure the money isn't getting into the wrong hands, I think she means. And then there's Richard Woyasik. He writes very simply, get rid of all fraud. I love that. And I think most people on Capitol Hill who are actually listening to what their constituents are saying would agree with you on that. Get rid of all fraud. Joanna Jenkins Robinson writes, Doge subcommittee hearing now in process. The Dems are using our frontline protection like police and firefighters. They wanted to defund and did do it is what they're using for excuses. That committee hearing, of course, wrapped up about an hour and a half ago, so we appreciate you chiming in. And Margaret Colvin writes, well, if there's checks going out to people 150 years only, Social Security definitely needs an audit. And finally, Wendy Logan writing, no. If being improperly spent, these expenditures must be eliminated or paused, at the very least for investigation. Thanks to each and every one of you for chiming in. We really appreciate your thoughts, and we appreciate you being here with us for America's Voice Live. I'm Terrence Bates. We'll see you back here, same time, same place tomorrow. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.